This is part 4 of 6.3 lecture. So 2 to the negative x. So since the negative is with the x, that means it's a reflection across the y-axis. So our point -1 1/2 becomes 1 1/2. 0 1 is on the y-axis, so it stays on the y-axis. And our point 1 2 becomes -1 2. So our graph looks something like this. You can see we still have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. So our domain is still -infinity to infinity. The range is 0 to infinity. And the horizontal asymptote is at y equals 0. Okay, -2 to the negative x means we have reflection across both the x and y axis. So that means our point -1 1/2 becomes, reflecting across the y-axis gives us a +1, and reflecting across the x-axis gives us a -1/2. The point 0 1, reflecting across the y-axis, it stays 0 1, but reflecting across the x-axis becomes 0 -1. And the point 1 2 becomes -1 reflecting across the y-axis, -2 reflecting across the x-axis. So we have -1 -2, -1 0 0 -1, and 1 1/2. Now, if you don't know how these points transform, just plug some values in. So plug in -1 0 and 1 and see what you get out for y. And then plot them and connect your dots. So as you can see, the domain is still -infinity to infinity. The range this time is -infinity to 0, and we still have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. So moving on to the next page, we have 2 to the 1 minus x. So if we rewrite that as f of x equals 2 to the negative x plus 1, you can see we reflect across y-axis, and we have a horizontal shift left 1. So If we plug in -1 for x, we get 2 to the -1 plus 1, which is 2 squared, which is 4. If we plug in 0, we get 2 to the first, which is 2. If we plug in 1, we get 2 to the 0, which is 1. And if we plug in 2, we get 2 to the -1, which is 1/2. So our graph looks like this. So we would do the horizontal shift first and then the reflection. So the domain is still -infinity to infinity. The range is 0 to infinity. And we still have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. Okay, how about 1 minus 2 to the x? So this would be, if we rewrite it, -2 to the x plus 1. So we reflect across the x-axis, and we have a vertical shift up 1. So reflect first and then shift. So let's see. Or we can just plot points. So if we do, let's see, x, y, at -1, we have 1/2, because we would have 2 to the -1, which is 1/2, but then it's negative, so -1/2 plus 1 is 1/2. At 0, we have -1 plus 1 is 0. And at +1, we have 2 to the first, which is 2, but negative, and then plus 1. So -2 plus 1 is -1. So we have 0, 1/2, and then -1. So this time, since we had a vertical shift up 1, our asymptote is at y equals 1. So our domain is still -infinity to infinity. Our range is 1 to -infinity, not including 1. And our asymptote is at y equals 1.